and even more things are going to happen. First of all, when you talk about peace building, as I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to limit it basically to peace building in terms of how do we deal with so-called post-conflict situations. I'm just going to move this one a little up. Some of you may know that, but in fact, when it comes to peace building, in terms of dealing with post-conflict situation, statistics is against us. The situation is the following. In all countries coming out of conflict, within 5 years, 50% of them relapse, go back into conflict situations where they exactly came from. This is a terrible situation for the countries involved and indeed for the whole international community. And I think lately, over the last few years, the philosophy, the thinking has been that the UN should try to do something about it. And that's exactly what's happening. Let me go back to 2005 and maybe even before. Kofi Annan, in fact, in 2003, set up what he called a high-level panel to try to address some of the urgent issues on the UN agenda, including peace building. And this high-level panel, which actually was a preparatory effort for a summit that they had in September of 2005, came up with the idea that the UN really should try to refocus, re-energize, and do more in terms of integrating lots of actors and the UN system itself, and do a more concerted effort on peace building. And the idea of setting up a peace building commission was indeed launched. When we came to the World Summit in September 2005, this idea was indeed adopted at the highest level. We had some 170, I think, world leaders, presidents, heads of government at the UN at the time. And there was unanimous agreement, yes, indeed, let's give it a shot. Let's try to see whether we can deal with and improve on the statistics that I quoted to you, that so many countries, after having spent lots of money, lots of resources, still fall back into conflict. And indeed, we had agreement at the summit in 2005 on the establishment of a brand new body, and we don't do that very often at the UN, to establish new bodies, and this is one. It was decided on at the summit, and indeed during the following General Assembly we worked out how it was supposed to function and who was supposed to be members, etc. And in the summer of 2006, the so-called the United Nations Peace Building Commission was formally established. So this is sort of the history of what has happened in terms of creating new bodies at the UN. Now, to establish bodies, although it doesn't happen all that often, may be fairly easy. To make it function and make a difference, not least to the countries involved, is a more difficult task, obviously. The UN decided that to go about this in a gradual manner, and it was decided that although there are lots of countries in the world that would qualify to be on the agenda of the Peace Building Commission and be focus of a more concerted international effort in this area, it was decided that at the beginning Sierra Leone and Burundi were supposed to be the pilot countries, or the test cases, if you will. And since last summer, we have indeed been working with Sierra Leone and Burundi on peace building activities and try to help these countries to stabilize the situation and get going in terms of consolidating the peace that's there, and preparing the ground for a solid development in the countries concerned. From a Norwegian point of view, we were very honored to, first of all, I was myself chosen to be one of the vice chairmen of the Commission, and Norway was given the responsibility to lead the work in terms of peace building on behalf of the UN in Burundi. This is no small task. Why was Norway selected? Well, we are on the Commission. It's set up in such a way that it's supposed to represent various groups in the United Nations. Norway is on it because we happen to be the fifth largest contributor in real terms, not in per capita, but in real terms to UN development activities, and the seventh largest overall contributor to the UN in anything that costs money. So that's the reason why we are there. In addition, the Commission has members from very major two contributing countries, Pakistan being one of the most important ones, but also others. We have countries which themselves have come out of conflict very recently. For example, a country like El Salvador 15 years ago, they had a peace agreement there, and we have also more recent example like countries like Croatia is on the Commission, and these countries have a very real and fairly recent experience to bring to bear on the work of the Commission. And of course we have members from both ECOSOC, the General Assembly, and indeed also the Security Council. So it's, I would say it's a fairly representative body that has been established. So what are the challenges when you want to do a better job internationally today and through the UN on peace building? There are a number of challenges, obviously. I should just mention three which I consider quite important. First of all, the UN has been doing peace building, I think, in various ways for many years. But it has all been piecemeal and ad hoc and not very well integrated. And in fact, the whole UN effort in this area has been way too fragmented and in a way characteristic of the UN system itself. It is indeed, it's a very fragmented system, many specialized agencies, many funds and programs, and to be effective, I think we realized that we have to integrate ourselves a little better, coordinate ourselves, and deliver as one, as is one of the phrases used these days around the UN, because we have just had another panel actually that delivered a report called Delivering as One, and it was the focus was on the UN, what it does at the so-called country level. And the conclusion there was that indeed to be effective, the UN itself has to be more integrated. Another important challenge, and that the Commission has to deal with, is to also then try to not only integrate the UN itself, but also to make sure that the whole international community is well coordinated when we are doing peace building in various countries. For example, the UN has to, in order to be effective and to make sense in terms of what we are doing, we have to work very closely, for example, with international financial institutions, meaning the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, first of all. But of course also the European Commission, which is a major player in terms of development matters today. So this is, and this sounds obvious, but it is not. In fact, the UN and the World Bank, for example, at times have been even competing in various ways. And if you are going to have good synergy, good coordination,